Hello everyone, you're watching the Halborn AMA, and today to join us we have got Credix Finance, we've got Maxim who's joining us, who's the co-founder and CTO. Hello there, and thank you for joining us in. Maxim, the Halborn AMA is actually our way of introducing our partners and the companies that we work with a little bit to the community. So why don't you start by telling us a bit about yourself, what you do at Credix, and what is Credix all about?
Great. Thank you, first of all, very much for having me today. And then let's first start to talk a bit about what we do, because it's a bit different than all the other DeFi platforms that you see out there. So in its simplest form, if you tell people what does Credix do, you could say we're a lending and borrowing platform. But then actually we're completely different than all the ones out there. Like you have the ones like a Compound, a Solana, etc., that do everything on chain. We actually have a big off-chain component. So what we really have is a private credit marketplace built on top of Solana. So a credit is something that really drives the world. If you want to buy a house, you take credit. If you're a big company, you need credit. And this is huge in the financial industry. So what we actually do is that we leverage blockchain to bring credit on chain. So if we zoom out again, we have several stakeholders. So on one hand, we have institutional investors. So we're not open for retail yet. Those investors are like hedge funds, crypto native hedge funds, credit funds, amongst others. They actually invest USDC for now in our market, in our credit market. And on the other hand, we actually have borrowers, but they don't put up collateral like Bitcoin or ETH. Those borrowers are actually fintechs in Latin America. So those fintechs, again, they have their own specialty. So for example, one of them does student loans, another one does car financing, another one does SME financing. So they know their local niche market actually very well. They know how to reach them. They know how to spot quality, because they only want to give credit to someone who actually pays it back with interest, right? But what they actually need, because they're not banks, is that they also need liquidity to borrow out. And that's actually where we come in. So we actually give them credit lines, credit facilities on chain, and those are actually financed by those institutional investors. And there we leverage blockchain technology to make it as fast and as efficient as possible in a fully automated way.
Wow, excellent. That's a very innovative concept. And so if I understand right, the institutionals, they use stable coins when they interact with your system, right, at the moment? Okay.
Exactly.
And you guys founded the company. What was the inspiration behind, and when did you start?
We actually started in November. Actually, we started before. So it was Thomas, Shane, and myself. We've been friends for a very long time. We worked together at a other company called Intellect, where we built like permissioned blockchain applications. So on permissioned blockchain networks for big banks, stock exchanges all over the globe. But at a specific point in time, we saw there was this huge opportunity, which was the big boom of DeFi. More and more capital was going to DeFi. On the other hand, you have like emerging markets, which are emerging. So there is a big need for credit. And then we thought, okay, maybe we can actually combine those two opportunities and build a company out of that. So that idea founded in May last year, and then went full time for it back in November, did our seed round. Then we started building a team, went live on mainnet back in January. And right now we've done 15 million in credit facilities, looking to grow that to 100 to 200 million by the end of the year.
Wow, very impressive. So right now you're joining us from Rio de Janeiro, and I understand you guys have a lot of business in Brazil. Where else are you targeting? What's the main user base of this?
Yeah, so actually credit, as I said, is everywhere. But of course, you need to focus as a company, especially at the start. So that's why we chose Brazil, because Brazil is a very, very interesting market, because there's still pretty high interest rates. So we can do like interest rate arbitrage. We charge like very competitive locally in the market, but it's still very high if you can offer that to Western-based investors, right? So that's why Brazil is interesting. And then you could say, but isn't it then super, super risky? And that is actually not really the case, because the interest rates are so high in Brazil because there is a lack of credit providers here. It's a big monopoly of the banks, and that's why they are so high, the rates. So that's one of the reasons we start in Brazil. Another reason is that we already had a big network here because one of our co-founders is half Brazilian. So he also lives here. I'm lucky to only stay here. Or unlucky to only stay here for 3 weeks, and I go back to Belgium. But he's here every day. So he speaks to our stakeholders every single day, speaks the language. We have boots on the ground here. So that was another reason. Then if we look like how do we want to expand, like next up will be Colombia and Mexico, and then gradually expanding across Latin America, and then to other markets like Asia and Africa.
Excellent. All of that sounds so exciting. All right. So, at Halborn, we're a security first company, and I always, I'm interested in where security fits in as a part of the tech strategy. So what's your take on that? When do you actually start considering that as the top factor?
I think from the very start. So I would always say, if you want to build like a feature for your protocol, it starts with a business value. Okay, we want to take this concept from traditional finance, for example, let's say tranching of deals. It's something crazy to cater for different risk appetites, but we want to translate that to something on-chain. So really start thinking with the whole team, okay, how can we first of all develop this, because you have a lot of constraints when building smart contracts. Then secondly, like what are all the things we think about that could be several attack vectors. So that's a first phase, the design phase.
Right.
Then we start implementing it. And there as well, like the different environments that you set up, the different branches that you set up in your GitHub are also very structured, where we have like our DevNet branch, which kind of mimics a Solana DevNet. From there, we always have our feature branches where we start working on features. We have to cover them with a lot of tests as well. So there we always think of happy flows, unhappy flows. We also built a fully digital twin of our protocol in Python, where we can like basically make limitless simulations, have like config files of, okay, those are the inputs, this is the expected output. And then we can also feed that to the on-program tests. So that's something pretty innovative that I would encourage everyone to do, to have like as many tests as possible. So, okay, once this feature is completed, we of course have reviews, etc. It gets into DevNet, and then we do nightly deploys, both from our program, our smart contracts, as well as the front end and the back end, so we can start testing. So this way we also have like manual tests. Every one of the team plays around with all the new features. If there's something, we can feed it back. So that's a whole loop. And then we work with big releases. So now we're going to launch our V2. And if there's anything that actually moves value, because you can have features like, for example, this stakeholder can have this permission, which is fine. You could deploy that to the mainnet. But if it can move value, then I think an external auditor should definitely be appointed. So you can again have this extra set of eyes that looks at it and always finds like other issues that you might not discover yourself. If that is fine, then you can go to mainnet. But even there, we have like one step in between in which we go to what we call pre-mainnet. So that's another environment where we say, okay, we have our nightly DevNet deploys, we test them, then we have a stable version, we put them pre-mainnet, and then again, different stakeholders test it on pre-mainnet, which is technically speaking, and luckily enough, we have a technical audience here, which is also deployed on DevNet, but it's just on a different program ID on Solana. So there we test again, and then we go to mainnet and open it up to our stakeholders. So that's a bit how we look at security. Next to that, we love to work like with a layered model. So we're a permission protocol. As I said in the beginning, we only target institutional clients on both sides of the protocol. So there they have to go through KYC, KYB. We put a proof of that on the blockchain with our partner Civic. Next to that, we have our whitelisting on chain. So we as Credix, we can actually issue you a pass that says, okay, you can invest in this specific market on Credix, and you will have a lockup this long. And other than that, you can actually not do anything with the market. Okay. Then next to that, we can also freeze a market. So that's a bit against decentralization maybe, but it's very important, right? Because it's still such a nascent technology that you should have some control as a team. So we can freeze a market if we see that anything would go wrong. We can put a patch live, and then we could thaw the market again. That's like different aspects of security we constantly look at and try to improve every day.
Wow, that was a whole lot of information and definitely a ton of points in there. So now I have a couple of follow-up questions, but thank you for being so clear and sharing that process with us. You mentioned like external auditors, because as I see, your security actually permeates into all the development processes, even when you're building the code. And then you're taking this external perspective from the auditors just to go that extra mile and make everything even safer. At what point did you consider as a company to partner with an external auditor? And also, you talked a lot about the tech, but I also want to ask you from a business perspective, where is the value proposition of a partnership like that?
At what point? I think point 0. So from the start, we knew, okay, we are going to build, we're going to go live in January. And then on the roadmap, just like we have our development epics, we put an epic external audit. Right. Because it's super important, especially the first time you go live, that you have it audited. And then again, as I said, every time you build something that moves value on chain, you have an external audit. Now, like, how do we translate that into a business value? I think it's pretty straightforward, right? If you have like a stamp from someone externally, like, okay, we also had a look at it. Yet no one can ensure that nothing can happen. That's how the world works. But if you have this stamp, that really gives trust to our stakeholders as well, which is very important in the business we're operating in, because we're talking to the biggest credit funds on this globe. They have like very stringent in-house processes. So every one of those like stamps is worth a lot there. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. The community value and the stakeholder value that this kind of trust generates is quite massive indeed. You also mentioned this little bit of a play with decentralization with some of the things that you were implementing. And as you know, like CeFi versus DeFi, there is always this quintessential problem of how decentralized can you get, and what are the permissions that you really need to control? What can you really get into the decentralization board? I'm just curious from like a business tech architecture perspective, what's your take on that, and how is Credix going around it?
No, good question. Like from a personal point of view, and maybe it's not the answer you want, but I don't think there's a right or wrong. It really depends on where you play, right? So if you build, let's say, a lottery game, it could be fully decentralized, then a DAO could actually discuss how much fees should go to the treasury, et cetera. That's good fun. If you start playing in a more regulated world like we do, and so we have a very big off-chain legal infrastructure with securitization and a lot of contracts, et cetera, then you should really start thinking, should this be fully decentralized? Should everyone have access to it? Like in an anarchist world, it would be interesting that everyone could be a credit investor and have access to those kind of instruments. But in the real world, that's just not how it works. So that's really where we start and thought, okay, we know it is possible. Maybe one day we will use decentralization for part of the governance and the on-chain decisions. But right now, we really use technology as an efficiency play. Like everything we do, we're still a small company. We're 10 people strong. We move super fast. Wow. Why is that? Because in everything we do, efficiency is at the core. So there as well, the technology we chose, blockchain, is an efficiency play. We can move value from Japan to Brazil in 300 milliseconds on Solana at almost no cost. That is efficiency. We can actually program everything people would do in Excel to follow up different investments and how the payout should happen and the tranche waterfalls, etc. We can automate that. That is efficiency. And that's really how we look at the technology today.
That's a very interesting and a well-balanced answer. Really loved finding out a little bit more about Credix and all the things that you do. All right, so we recently audited the Credix Tranches Program Solana Security Audit. And thank you so much, Maxim, for joining us and for this chat. It has been very, very informative for me as well as our audience, I'm pretty sure. Thank you.